One thing that kept running through my mind as I listened to what people were saying was that we really are all part of a utopian project, because using evidence doesn't come naturally to most governments, certainly not my own. So in a sense, we're all in this together, because everyone in this world wishes that empirical work could drive thinking, that facts on the ground could influence theory, that networking among people who share the view that it's important to understand how the world actually works before interests and power trump evidence. And that should be yet another reason for all of us forging closer ties. Is your microphone working now?
Yes.
Good.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Deputy Governor, Bank of Uganda. I'll start by thanking the panel for raising issues pertinent to influencing the global agenda, and would like to especially thank Professor Wangwe for spelling out the problem that we face, and would like to share my own experience where I served as the executive director for 22 countries at the World Bank. And I was also on the panel that prepared the document for the least developed countries that Wangwe talked about. Now, I think we have some low-lying fruits where these think tanks can influence the global agenda. But these channels at the moment are not exploited by the think tanks. In most of these regional and international groupings, Africa is represented. If you take the World Bank, we have our representative. When you take the IMF, we have a representative. Even within the WTO, and take the meeting that is taking place now of the G20, we have presidents who are representing Africa. The question is, to what extent have we formed an agenda that represents our interests, as Wangwe was saying, so that these people are carrying a message that represents our interests? When I was at the World Bank is known for producing policy documents. You almost get 3-4 documents daily, and you're representing 22 countries. I used to send these documents back to the ministries of finance, and you would not get a response or a comment on most of these documents, with the exception of 2 countries, and I think I should mention South Africa at least, was the one country out of the 22 I was representing. So there is an issue of the think tanks linking into the ministries of finance that receive these documents. So at the World Bank, we decided that we should post these documents onto a website so that interested parties can read these documents and send comments. We advertised this website, but even then, we were not receiving comments. Now, what did we finally do? What we did was to approach DFID to help us, so that we link into a think tank in Africa to help us get some comments. The think tank we were using was the AERC, so that AERC could use their own researchers to comment on these documents. But even then, the feedback was slow. And I can tell you that at the time, the NGOs had influenced the bank not to finance natural resources exploitation for various reasons. But we were not getting a strong voice from Africa to counter the voice of the NGOs. So what's my point? My point is that we have representatives, be it in the G20, be it in the G8, be it in the World Bank, IMF. Let us empower our representatives. And I want to share with you something that worked. When I was at the African Development Bank, there were several meetings of the Gs, G2, G8, G20. At one of the meetings, they invited the AU to send a representative. And the question was, what views would this representative take? Finally, it was decided that African Development Bank would back up our representative. And we did a lot. We organized meetings. At that time, we organized meetings of ministers. And most of these organizations would organize meetings of ministers. And we were able at least to put on the table our own concerns and our own interests. So it seems the low-lying fruit is each think tank to link up to the politicians, because it is the politicians, at least, that are invited onto the table. And I saw this also with the mobilization of resources for the World Bank and the ADB. In both cases, they invite representatives. And that's where the conditionalities are discussed for the financing by the World Bank and the ADB. And it is, we would influence the global thinking by empowering those representatives that go to those meetings. So, to me, that is a low-lying fruit where the think tanks can influence the global thinking. Now, to Professor Wangwe, my disappointment in the whole presentation was not mentioning the African Development Bank as the institution we could use. Thank you.
Who would like to comment? Ruth?
Sure. Does this work? Yeah. So there's, I mean, that was a very helpful comment. I think what it made me reflect on is that I think in a stylized way you can think that there's a kind of affirmative policy agenda where new ideas are put on the table, backed up by research and evidence and promoted. And then there's a kind of, this isn't the perfect word, but a kind of defensive agenda, which is to push back against bad ideas and analyses that don't reflect local realities. And I think there's maybe a different strategy for each of those agendas. So I think for the affirmative agenda, there's a tremendous and very direct role of institutions like the ones that you come from, and a tremendous opportunity for you to bring to light innovations that are occurring in your countries and to really infuse the real world into global level policy discussions, whether at the World Bank, the IMF, or elsewhere. I think for the defensive agenda, the most successful strategy in many cases may be some kind of partnership with the NGO community, many of whose members are quite skilled at effective pushback against policies promulgated by global institutions, whether they are good or bad, frankly. They're just good at pushback. So, I'm just kind of formulating these ideas in response to what was put on the table, and you should feel free to push back against them. But I think at least thinking about the affirmative and the defensive agendas in distinct ways might be helpful.
Antonia.
I think I agree very much with Kasekendi on the fact that the best way forward is for think tanks to link with politicians. This is very, very important. These are people who desperately need data and information at critical times, and they don't have the capacity and where to get them from. And in think tanks generally, there's that kind of detachment that is between think tanks, especially if these think tanks are independent, you know. So the trick is, how do you build trust and relationship with government and policymakers so that you actually know when, how, and timely, and when to really support them with this kind of information. I think that's where the whole thing is. Thank you.
Samuel, and then I'm going to go to, I think it was Roxana. I've got lots of hands coming up, but I've got Roxana here. I've got a whole forest of them. Just yes,
Chairperson,
Samuel.
would you like to hear from others first, or do you want us to respond one after another? But very quickly, I will say I fully agree with Ruth Kasekende. I think the bottom line is for, is it on?
Yes, it's on.
Oh. The bottom line is to understand who you should do strategic alliance with. And this will vary from continent to continent, country to country. In Africa, it may be the ADB. In Asia, it may be some other institutions. Latin America, other institutions. The critical thing is know who to strategically network with so you can channel your influence through those organizations. Maybe politicians, in some cases, in others, regional organizations, regional banks, regional research institutions, and so on. So the principle is know who you should strategically network with in order to channel your influence to the global thinking.